in conversation. I was like, what?
Right.
I was like, okay.
Yeah, I don't use language against people, so
Exactly.
it's
Same here.
so when I think of, it's more hurtful to more hurtful to say that someone's stupid
Well,
than
yeah,
it is to
because
say, like
fuck off.
the world's in fucking shambles.
Yeah.
Like, it just doesn't bother me at all.
Exactly.
It's depending how you use it. So
I agree.
anyway, all right, Wesley Wharton.
Yeah, that's me. So what are we going to be doing today? What's the conversation?
All right, so you had told me the other day when we were in the shop that you believe that Americans have too much freedom.
That's a double-edged sword, but on the main part, I'd say yes, that's true.
Still say yes?
Yes, 100%.
Okay. First, I'm going to kill that AC, I think.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm actually
no
not
worries.
sure how much that comes through. Looks like some. Yeah, give me 1 second.
Yeah, dude, take your time.
Where were we? All right. So, what would you say was your original position, like the few days ago when we first talked about that?
So when I think about, like, we have too much freedom in America, U.S., and even some other countries that are close to the same limits of freedom that we have, my biggest question is, well, what kind of freedom is it that I'm talking about? And I try to put it across to people is we have the freedom to say what we want, do what we want, basically, but there are certain consequences. And I think that the consequences usually don't fit those types of different freedoms. I mean, we have the right to think, say, and do, but you got to do it in a fashion that you don't get yourself into trouble.
Okay.
And so I can respect people who have the morality to follow those guidelines on how you use your freedom. And then there's the people who go the exact opposite direction and, oh, well, that's my right. I have freedom. I have this. It's like, yes, you do, but you're trying to say that that freedom nullifies consequences. And that's like the biggest thing that I see is we need to look at what actually is freedom versus you have the right to do this, but FYI, you're still going to be punished if you do it the wrong way.
Okay.
And that's like the biggest thing that gets me is we have too many people who can drink their lives away, treat their children like crap, and they get slapped with treating their children like crap, not the fact that they're alcoholics. And it's like, I understand there's things like addiction or they're just prone to certain diseases, and there's a lot of things people can't control, but there's a lot of things that we can help them control, but then we're infringing on their freedom.
Okay.
And that's the problem I can see is we can help so many more people with their everyday lives if we all work together. And I don't think that moving towards 100% freedom or like the old Wild West days where I don't see that as being feasible.
Okay. I really dig this. Because I'm coming at it from such a different angle. Like, this is badass. Okay. So you think, so let's say that people were not as free to drink their lives away.
Yeah.
Okay. So you think that would be like a net positive for them?
I mean, it honestly depends on the situation, and that's the thing is freedom comes more as a blanketing effect. It's a very strong, honorable word that we use every day. We're told it, we're taught it in school, and I mean, it boils down to the idea of what is the situation that is causing this drunk? You know, is he a single guy? He just had a depressing life, and he drinks his life away. That's
Okay.
one thing. I mean, honestly, to each their own. If alcohol is your escape, I mean, whatever. But if it's hurting other people, and that's where freedom and human nature really starts to clash, is freedom can't be 100% just free, and we can't be 100% just free because then we do start hurting other people.
Okay. So where should freedom end?
Freedom should end at the line of I don't know. That's one of those things is like, because there's different types of freedom, and that's kind of one of the ideas that I was hoping we could veer around to a little bit later in it. Is there's more than one type of freedom.
Okay. What kinds of freedom are there?
So there is. I've been doing a little bit of reading on because I wasn't even 100% sure. I just knew freedom because I was taught that in school. You know, America's a free country, but there is social, which is between like you and me, freedom. We're allowed to talk our minds, and if you don't like it, you can walk away or you can get mad. And then there's economical, which is between businesses, corporations versus the people. And then there is moral freedom, which is between and capitalistic freedom, more veered towards government versus the people.
Okay.
There's those three types, and then with each one of those, it kind of breaks down into a couple ideas that floated around with philosophers of there's negative freedoms and then there's positive freedoms. And not negative is the connotation of bad. It just it's like a battery. There's a negative and a positive.
Okay.
They both have their own effects in that circuit.
So what would be an example of a negative freedom?
So an example of a negative freedom is I have the freedom to apply for any job.
Okay.
But let's say that I'm only 4'5" and I'm applying to be part of the SWAT team or the police force. Highly unlikely they won't take me
Or
for
the
my
Knicks.
or the Knicks. Most likely says
I keep
that
putting in applications to be on the
Knicks,
Knicks,
and they're just not letting me,
and
man.
I can't even get a person to person interview.
Exactly,
What
and
the
that's like
hell,
the
man?
biggest problem. It's like that is a negative freedom because it's just naturally there. They have the right to do that. They have the right to be like, I'm going to turn the application. I'm going to go do the interview. They're going to tell me no. And then, oh, well, that's unfair and blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, the job calls for someone, this height, this build. They need to be, if they're going to be an officer SWAT, they need to be able to take a person down who's double their height or so on and so forth. I mean, and then with positive freedoms is you look at a situation like that where, oh man, I'm not tall enough to be a police officer. What if I could use the freedom that I have to look for jobs, to free think, to get education, to work a job and make money? What if I use those freedoms to find a job like that I can actually do?
Okay.
So basically, the difference between the two is negative freedoms follow our natural human roles, where positive freedoms influence self awareness, understanding our human side, and trying to transcend to a higher thinking level. Basically, looking at, man, I grew up in a poor part of town, or the projects, I'm never going to be amount to anything. And then one day you have a wake up and you're just like, wait, what if I did, take on a little bit of student debt, get a job, move away from here, get a good job, and live a whole different life?
Okay.
There's a difference between those two freedoms versus, oh, I can't do this because, oh, there's segregation, or I can't, no, try and find a way around it. And that's kind of the thing I see is there's so many negative freedoms in America and not enough positives.
Okay, so I think the negatives and positives are balanced because, like, for the person who doesn't get the job to, be on the police force because he's 5'4" or 4'5", you said 4'5"?
Yeah, 4'5" roughly. That's pretty short for a man.
Pretty short. That's
Yeah.
pretty short for a man. So, the positive side of that freedom is that the police force doesn't have to take on a 4'5" person.
Of course.
So, I mean, I see it more as, I mean, there are so what I'm looking for, like, there's a negative, there's the flip side of every coin.
Oh, of
And
course.
if someone, if I want to be free, let's say I'm directing a film and I want to be free to cast an African American in an African American role, and not have somebody jumping all over my case because I didn't cast a Hispanic person in that role. Like
And yeah, I see where you're coming with that. And definitely there is always that flip side of the coin. And that's what I was saying. There's a difference between the social and then there's like the big business or the filmmakers, the music makers. They have their own ideas and they're totally free to have those ideas and try to put it out there. But it starts to become a big mess because everyone has a different subjective view on what those freedoms are. Are they being infringed upon? Are they being used against them? And that's kind of like the biggest issue I see. And if we could come up with a more globalized idea, even in a smaller form of countries, cities, counties, of what a universal freedom that covers all of the bases, and yeah, it would be difficult. I mean, philosophers have been trying to make sense of it since the 1800s. I mean, of what the idea of freedom means to people, and the most basic version that's ever written about is you're not in jail, so you're free. And
Okay.
then there's but even then, one philosopher said, well, if you do go to jail, you're still free to pace your cell. You're still free to think to yourself. You're still free nowadays to write letters to your loved ones. You're still free in some cases to be able to study and get some further education while you're in jail/prison. So technically you still do have freedoms, even though you're imprisoned.
Right. Well, and people who come out of prison oftentimes feel more restrained by their past than they would, if they were in prison. So, like,
Exactly.
it's why you've got multiple. I mean, it happens all the time that people will get out, commit some crime so that they can go back into this life that
structured
felt
life.
more free to them.
Yeah, and it's structured. They have a reason, they have a cause, and that seems to be the biggest thing. On two different philosophers have been discussing it, and I kind of am still in between the idea. I still fall more towards my idea. I think we are a little too free. I think we are a little too able to do whatever we want, think whatever we want, say whatever we want, even though sometimes it's right, sometimes it's wrong. I'm not to judge. That's not my job here. But I kind of look at it in this light that the other two philosophers have looked at it is without freedom, if you have guidelines, laws, rules, you can work around that and you can come up with an idea on how to structure your life around that. It gives you a goal to meet. Parents raising their children. Oh, if you do good in school, you're not grounded, or you get money, or you get so on and so forth.
Okay.
And that helps really transcend the mind to bring you up to freely think for yourself, a higher thinking level than what the standard human is, where if you're 100% free like the Wild West, people just did whatever they wanted.
Right.
And that's the problem I see, is we're trying to revert
Huh.
back to the old days of America, when it was a mess, when there was segregation, when there was horrid racism, people getting beaten in the streets. Not that they don't anymore. There is still some occurrences, no doubt. But that's kind of where I'm seeing it. People are trying to move it back to where we should be moving forward, where we can all just think together, understand the differences, and move forward from that.
Okay.
So that's kind of where I'm at on that idea.
All right, I dig it. So definitely I agree with you. Like Wild West, I think the difference between the Wild West and what I would go for as far as like a really free society is that in the Wild West, you were free to encroach on other people's freedoms.
Exactly.
And there was really little to nothing that anybody could do about it. They'd have to just outdraw you, basically, or
Exactly.
sneak up or whatever.
Whatever it took to
you know,
basically get
Yeah,
it
that
across.
Wild West justice has to take its place. I mean, it has to be there if you have the freedom to encroach on somebody else's freedom.
Exactly.
And so my idea with this whole thing is like, I don't think we're free. I don't think we're free enough, because right now there are things that I can do that aren't encroaching on anyone else's freedom, and I could get arrested for.
But the biggest thing that I look at, which is actually one of the points I'm glad you kind of came around to, it may not be encroaching on anyone or necessarily even harmful to anyone, but is it something that could still be considered an abuse of freedom? Because
such as
in any sense, like, oh, well, we have the freedom to have a semi-free market in some areas and stuff like that, and then you create an unfair competition. You're going to push other people out. It may not necessarily be harmful to them. They can either change their game plan and try and beat you, and it does create a competition, which is good for business, keeps prices low, helps the consumer. But on the other hand, once it reaches to a point of unfair, it may not be 100% illegal, or it may not be 100% harmful, but it is still a slight abuse of power. And I think humans naturally, because human behavior, we are either slightly lazy, slightly greedy. There are negatives to humans naturally. And we sometimes use that to fuel the abuse of our freedoms too. Like, oh, I don't like what this person is saying. I have the right to free speech. That's an abuse of freedom.
okay. So how so?
So if you got protesters on the street,
Okay.
and they have their signs, they're saying one thing, it's a small group, and you come up and you start talking trash to them. Well, he has the right to free speech, they have the right to free speech and protesting, but you're not being constructive by yelling at them or telling them to get off the curb or anything like that. That in my opinion is an abuse of freedom, because what was even the point of doing that? You're only going to stir up a fight. You're not doing anything productive out of that. Let them do what they're doing.
Okay, let's say that stays peaceful. Most protests do stay generally peaceful. Let's say you have two people on very opposite sides of the same issue.
Of course.
And you've got one side that's making a point, and you've got one side that's just screaming and swearing.
In that situation, it really does boil down, in my opinion, to where who's going to be the bigger person.
Okay, and the bigger person gets points, though. You know what I mean? Like in the mind of the viewer, if I'm looking at this scenario and you've got two people who, like, one side is making a good point and one side is just screaming and calling the other person stupid, I'm like, well, you didn't say, you had a content-free argument. Why would I listen to that? So I mean, like, they're using their freedom, but they're using it in such a weak way that it almost doesn't even matter. It doesn't hurt me at all if I make a point and somebody says you're an idiot. I'm like, well, say something. Say something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It just doesn't bother me.
Well, and that's the thing, is like you have the maturity to think about that. Oh, it doesn't bother me. But there are people your age and even older who are like, oh, they would get worked up about it. They'd be yelling, they'd be screaming too, because they're seeing a protest happening and deciding whichever side of the fight they're on. They don't care about if it's productive. They don't care about if they're hurting anyone. They just think, oh, well, if they're protesting, I have the freedom to also protest, or I have the freedom to go over there and tell them to be quiet because I have freedom of speech. And I think the idea of freedom is what is really misconstrued and abused, especially by the higher powers than standard citizens. And I think that the higher powers definitely use that idea, and I came across some writings, and I totally agree with it, that the problem is freedom as an idea, as something that we use, and I guess a force. It is truly just a force of nature when we bring freedom into question. But our government, our higher ups in corporate, all of them, they've turned it more into a subject. It is an object we can hold in our hands and use against each other when it's not. It's something that is over all of us. But somehow, and that's where I fall into the idea of, why does the government give us freedom and then either give us consequences or unfair consequences, which, I mean, everything, I think laws should be in place. Laws are good. They protect people. Without them, people would be getting hurt who are innocent bystanders in extenuating circumstances. It sucks. It happens. You know, car wrecks happen every day. Drunk drivers happen every day. It's sadly a part of our lives.
Yeah.
But then again, there's the one guy where it truly was a extenuating circumstance, a freak accident, and it's just like, oh, you had freedom and now you don't.
Right.
It's
yeah.
like, where is the line on what is and what isn't freedom in America?
But we do have laws in place that that address intent. You know, I mean, manslaughter is not the same thing as murder. One.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think there's, you know, there are different degrees of like the offense. I think, you know, in that specific case, it is taken into account. Did this person mean to do this? And if not, their sentence is generally drastically less than if they did.
And even though this idea is on the minority, what about the people who just have enough money for a good lawyer?
Oh,
Then freedom
absolutely.
don't matter anymore.
That's true. That is really true.
We don't have the freedom of speech and stuff at that point. You literally have to pay an exorbitant amount of money to either get free of a crime you didn't commit or free of a crime you did commit.
Right.
It's either or. You have to pay an exorbitant amount of money just to get that voice. So your voice is no longer viable in that situation because I didn't go to law schools for 8 years. I mean,
right.
How am I supposed to defend myself?
So before we move on, dude.
I got like pages.
Dude brought notes, and I'm loving it. I'm like, I really am stoked that you. Like,
I just wait for you to bring up a topic, so that way, if there's anything I do know about, I can either just voice an opinion or voice something that I've actually read about and try to understand.
It's great, man. So I was gonna say, like, I think that where we run into problems economically is where you don't. So like monopolies.
Yeah, monopolies are a joke.
So in this city, our trash company they've got a contract with the city. It would literally be illegal for let's say a junior in high school who wants to figure out, what can I do? And well, there are people who have been who have been complaining about the trash company. So I'm going to save up $1,500, get myself the worst truck that I can find, and I'm going to go pick up people's trash and take it to the dump for them.
Exactly. And
you're a trash company, and you are at that point, you are in competition with this other company that has the contract, which I think is such nonsense.
Exactly, and it really is just a form of control over people. And at that point, I don't even think it's freedom, because it's not even on a large enough scale to have any force and movement between the people, because what is the one small town going to do against, they're taking our trash. We can't just let the streets fill up. We can't just let our houses fill up and smell. So there's really no fight there, and we really don't have the freedom and the movement to be able to do anything about it, and no one's going to fork out millions on 7 different lawyers to get rid of that monopoly. And then they're going to have a bunch of legal terms that say it's not a monopoly, so it's not illegal.
And they say, and I've talked to our city councilman about this specifically. The one that I talked to, and I do try to keep this kind of as vague as possible for like,
I do,
because I'm not sure how public I want to be with my location and all that. But I do. He said that the reason it's not considered monopolistic is because there was another company that put in their bid to have that contract.
But just because you put in a bid doesn't mean you have 2 companies running the show.
I totally know.
And even
we don't have options. That is a monopoly.
And even if there was one other company and they were working side by side, that's just considered an oligopoly, which means 2 companies run the show and they're working together to screw the standard consumer.
Yeah,
that's not fair. I mean, look at in our area, we can only get 3 types of internet. 2 of those types of internet are the main competition, and they piss in each other's pockets all day long.
Right.
The third option is for the rural farmer. So you're not going to get anything great out of that internet. It's like, how is this even fair?
Right.
There's no chance here. And I mean, that alone to me says, wow, this sucks. And how are people getting away with this? I mean, honestly.
So there are a couple of different types of monopolies. There's a natural, there's like a naturalist, I can't even remember what it's called. like a localized monopoly or a natural monopoly or something
Yeah,
like
it's
that.
just going to be the circumstances of where the location is at and what merchant is selling whatever he's doing. It's just that's the only
Right.
thing he
We
sells.
can only have one water company. We can't
Exactly.
because the infrastructure is built to reroute everything to a new wastewater treatment plant
Exactly.
and to another, station where they pump out clean water.
And that's actually a good example because we can only have one water company, but that doesn't stop you from going and buying water from the store.
Right.
Now that's an honest monopoly right there. There's no real reason to say yes or no on that because
I'm not going to dump gallons of water over myself to
exactly.
take a shower.
Yeah, that sucks. But if we were ever forced in that position, we would have the chance. Like if the water company shut down for maintenance, it's like, oh yeah, no water for 4 hours. You could survive because we can still buy it.
Sure.
Where a true monopoly that is corrupt would be like, oh no, we're not going to allow water to be sold in this town unless it's ours.
Right.
And that's the problem that we face with some companies. Other companies, it is just natural water companies. Some areas, trash companies are more relaxed and nice about it.
Okay.
And yeah, but it's just,
I think the government has freedom that it shouldn't have.
oh, 100%. They have freedoms way beyond what a standard civilian has.
But like the freedom to prop up a company, right?
Mm-hmm.
To have a company that gives some super PAC to a politician who's about to run, and then when you're in office, don't forget that you owe us a favor.
Exactly. It's
Pretty little
completely
knees
unfair.
you got there. It'd be a shame if something happened to him.
Well, and I've seen it firsthand, not even just looking at the news. I've lived in it firsthand where I live. Our county government decided that, oh, hey, we want to make a change to sales tax. Okay, sure. Well, it's in lieu of putting in a different kind of business. Well, wouldn't the other business bring us more money? Well, yes, it would, but we don't want it.
What is this? A real life example?
This is a real life example.
What
I'm
was
just
it?
not using names. Well,
Oh, okay.
it was in place of changing sales tax instead of having dispensaries for marijuana.
Got it. Okay.
And that was the biggest thing. It's like marijuana is going to bring in a lot more revenue than a hike in sales tax.
Right.
And the biggest problem is they didn't say anything to anyone. This bill just shows up on the Oregon government website, and luckily we had independent reporters even on our small area that fished it out. And the civilians in the area had to fight tooth and nail just to even get a chance to vote on it. We're supposed to have democratic values in this
Yeah.
republic, and we didn't even get a chance to vote. We had to repeal that bill and argue, and they even tried to say that our votes wouldn't count, that only people living within city limits, not the whole county, that it wouldn't count. And I mean, it just went on and on and on. I was just like, all we want is a chance and a paper in the mail saying yes or no. Check the box.
Oh, I would like to fight for the people of America to have as much freedom as the government.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
that'd be a good step.
And that's what kind of makes people chuckle. And what I'm going to say is definitely controversial. A lot of people don't like it, and a lot of people argue. And I've finally sat down and looked up the dictionary definitions, and it really changes my eyes on how I see my own idea and everything like that.
Okay.
Is we live in a government that is based upon democratic values, but mainly sole a republic. But as we see, especially smaller town local laws, it's becoming more of a totalitarianism kind of government, where it's the government controls the people, and that's all there is to it. And oh yeah, your votes, they're there, but it's a total facade.
It's
a
a
lie.
suggestion.
Yeah, it's a
And we
real
only-
suggestion.
Yeah, I heard there's a quote, something to the effect of, "If it mattered, they wouldn't let you vote on it."
Exactly. And that's what led me to the idea. I was like, well, maybe America truly does, and this is the controversial part, needs a little bit of socialism. Now, I'm not talking about Marxist socialism, which is the stepping stone from capitalistic environment to communism. That's not what I'm talking about at all. And the dictionary definition is political and economical theory of social organization which advocates the means of production, distribution, and exchange should be owned or regulated by the people, the social people. So that would mean that every person who lives, walks, speaks, and buys or sells or works has a say in where businesses go, how they're ran, how everything works. The government
Okay.
doesn't get to say that. But the government would be a part of it because they are people too.
So basically, the people decide how it goes. Like the people decide is if it's a yes or a no. Let's
If it's
say.
a yes or a no, and
then
if
the
there's
government
one guy
figures out
saying
how to
no,
make that happen.
yeah, and if
Okay.
there's one guy saying no, he has to explain himself. It's not just, oh, I'm saying no because I want to say no. And basically, the way I look at that definition is it is a forced democracy. everyone has to say. There's no, oh, I don't want to vote about it, I'm not interested. No, you have to say.
So you would not advocate for the freedom to vote if you want to, or not to vote if you don't want
In
to.
that situation, if there is an issue like that where some guy's like, well, I don't care if we get, this superstore or that superstore, or we get, this internet service or that internet service, whatever, I think the government imbued should have a default as basically, I'm not voting, so let's just mark that percentage off of the equation. But if
Okay.
you are a voter, you're a registered voter, I mean, and you are avid at it, there should definitely be, your vote is going to be held up against everyone else's vote too, and they're all going to work together or against each other based on what the equation is on passing a law or bringing in a business, or is this business doing corrupt things. And
Right.
it's truly up, like, because we look at Walmart Supercenters, most corrupt company in the US at the moment, in my opinion, when it comes
Okay.
to direct input from consumers versus the people running these stores. Anything we say isn't going to faze them. They have so much money and so many lawyers and such a big name, no matter what we say, it's not going to change anything. Where in a more socialistic view, if 100,000 people got together and were like, yeah, we don't like this, and then all across the US, another 100,000 people from every city were like, yeah, we don't like this, eventually that number will pick up, and in this kind of government that I'm thinking of, they would have to do something.
Okay.
Because that's the way the law's written. And that's kind of the idea I was going on. And I don't know. It's kind of like the same idea that you can't have two car dealerships on the same block, or
Okay.
else it's unfair competition.
I
But
don't see
other
why that's unfair.
because you can literally ask one guy for a quote, walk 15 steps to the next dealership on the same block, and get another quote. That's considered unfair competition in the
That's
in the
just
capitalistic
that's just
world.
competition, baby.
It's just an example from
Yeah.
actual historical situations
Okay.
and laws that are written, and it's situations like that. Who has the control to say that car dealerships can't be next to each other? You're totally cool with it. It's competition. I don't care. It's competition. If he's got the better deal, I'm going to him. But for some reason, some big wig in law and some guy who probably had investments in a car dealership said, no, I don't like that. Well, why does he get to say and we don't?
Okay.
And that's where socialism would fix that little attribute, is it does help control the economy based on what the people need. And that's the way I always look at things, is what is good for us.
Okay. So I will say we've voted Walmart in. We have. No, I mean, like, of course there will be like city hearings and things like that.
Yeah.
And there have been a lot of, potential, we're looking at making this lot into a Walmart, and it gets shut down because there are enough votes against. But we vote with our dollars.
Yeah, which is
And-
sad in my opinion.
Why is it sad?
Because honestly, I don't think that money should be the feasible object to know if we should have something or not that could potentially help a large scale of people or hinder a large scale of people.
Interestingly enough, though, this is one of those opposite examples.
Mm-hmm.
This is the poor people voting.
Yeah, I know, because Walmart does have the lowest prices, honest to God.
And they have cheap stuff that
and
wears
they've got
out.
cheap stuff
They sell the Band-Aids that, like, okay, well, my vacuum just broke and I don't have $300 for a good vacuum. I'm
And
going to go get a $35
I won't lie,
vacuum.
Walmart is that one store where if you do need it, they do have it. And it's like, ow, I don't want to have to shop here, but they have what I need.
Right.
But that's the other part of it.
But
is
you're
that-
voting, though. When
but-
you go there, you're voting.
But the problem is with that, is at what cost, though?
Yeah, oh, I totally agree.
Yeah, and that's where we need
I
more.
wish I never shopped at Walmart. But I do.
Sometimes you have to, and that's the sucker punch that we have to deal with here in America. And basically, the idea I have for the way government should be when it comes to our freedoms and what we can and can't control easily or not easily isn't something that could feasibly happen in 5, 10 years, even in 50 or 100 years, because where we are now, it's not an easy transition. It's not a transition people want to make because we are so used to the freedoms that we have versus the freedoms of what we could have.
I agree. I totally agree. Can you move that a little bit closer to you? I'm
A little bit short.
Yeah, I'm watching these
Okay.
watching these levels, and
For sure.
mine's like way hotter than yours. So absolutely, if we would give up some of the, like, for me, let's rewind the clock 35 years before there were really Walmarts all over.
Yeah,
the
it was
place.
just barely a little tiny chain.
The reason that we voted them in is because before that, our only other two options could do whatever they wanted to do with their prices.
Of course.
So Walmart took advantage of the system that had every person basically paying between, well, this high price or this high price, Walmart came in and said, we're going to give you a new thing here.
Yeah, here's the real competition.
Right.
Try.
And
Yeah.
so, and it absolutely, it did put a lot of those other companies out of business because, well, and the problem at the beginning for mom and pop shops was that they couldn't compete with this business model that Sam Walton produced, created, where
he
said,
had the
"I'm gonna
distributors,
do-"
he had everything
Right.
that going for him, and the mom and pop shop's just like, well, we don't have that.
Right. Yeah. But there's nothing that stopped them from making it. He just
Exactly.
thought of it first. The problem, where I think Walmart has gotten off track, and I mean the whole United States has gotten off track,
Of course.
is by giving contracts to companies like Walmart that benefit them further. So it's not even just the competition. Now we're giving you steroids.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
and that steroids that aren't available to the smaller shops.
Exactly. Even some of the bigger chains don't have some of those, and it's really a big leap ahead that they have versus a lot of other people.
So what we're talking about here, though, is the difference between the freedom to vote with our dollars, versus I mean, it really is capitalism versus crony capitalism.
Exactly.
So if you're arguing against crony capitalism, I'm 100%
Oh,
on board
yeah,
with
of course.
you. But I do think, I mean, every example that I've seen of the free market doing its thing, it offers the best thing to the people, and the more dispensable or disposable income that the people have, the better the economy kind of runs.
Well, of course, and I can see capitalism from that angle, definitely, because the only reason someone's selling something is because they saw something that needed to be bought. You know, this town needs this, let's sell it. You know,
Totally.
it's a great idea, let's do it. The problem I have is when you get a very developed store, it's been there for either 5, 10 years, few decades, even then, you have what I've been reading about is the hope of morality. They're free to do what they want and blah, 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 so on and so forth. And then people get shocked when they spin a 180 and do something crooked. It's like,
Right.
you gave them freedom. What do you expect them to
And
do?
you gave them all the
Never-
power that they needed to
Exactly.
make this thing that you never wanted to happen.
Exactly. And that's
So-
why I think definitely some of those freedoms need limits. Not 100% limited. And I'm not saying take away freedom completely, but I'm just saying certain types of freedoms. And that kind of what led me to the idea of that there's a negative and a positive type freedom. One of them is the one that needs to be limited.
Okay.
It definitely, to keep people in a fairly ethical manner. And ethics as in, this is what our government has set out before us. This is what our law enforcement... This is what our law enforcement says we need to follow, because that's the big difference between ethics and morals. Morals is like, I do this because it makes me feel good and it makes other people feel good. Ethics is what the people around you are saying is right. So
Okay.
our law enforcement says don't kill people. That's an ethic, not necessarily moral, because there are psychos out there. Besides
Okay,
the point.
fair.
Besides the point. But, and that's the way I look at it, is we need to look at our negative freedoms, which are a good thing. We have to have a balance of both. Every philosopher says we need a balance between negative and positive freedoms,
Okay.
or else we'll never aspire to do anything. But the negatives definitely got to have the right laws and the right limitations that are equal for everyone and fair to everyone. And that's where I see our problem, is the fairness of these freedoms.
Okay.
And that's
Yeah.
kind of where I'm at on it, and why I think there should be a change, a new way of thinking about it. Is we want to aspire to be something better. Everyone does at some point in their life. Why not find an easier way to enable that?
And that's totally I like the idea.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot about communism.
That
Man,
floats.
it's a beautiful dream. It's a beautiful dream. The problem is that it's a dream.
Exactly.
I
There's
mean,
no true communism that can function, because humans naturally, by behavior, I will either have laziness or greediness. That's two things that are always found in
Right.
humans. Communism can't function with that.
Right.
Everyone has to do their part.
So we would have to basically, you'd have to breed out the, and I am not advocating for this, just so we're all clear, but you'd have to breed out, those two traits. You would have
Exactly.
you would have to make it so that everybody thinks the same. Now, I think that I have faith in humanity that in the next few hundred years, we may reach a point, assuming that we get that far without getting struck by a who knows what, or
Who
whatever.
knows what else exploding?
Or yeah, exactly. So, as long as we can make it that far, there is a mindset shift, and it's all headed toward the same place.
Of course.
And it is something where did you ever look at spiral dynamics?
Yes, I did. It is
Dude,
a very educational thing to look into,
it's
and how different types of people work together or don't work together,
right.
and where you fall on that scale. And it's not a judgmental scale in any way, which I found was nice. It was truly just looking at the overall objective of this person.
Okay.
And that's what I
Yeah.
thought was really nice about it. Where most scales, it's like, oh, you're smart or you're dumb, or
Right.
you're rich or you're poor. Where this one was just like, no, bro, you do you, and here's a color and a number or a letter that matches you.
Right. Yeah.
It's perfect.
Yeah. But there's a natural progression that happens with
Yes,
that too.
and some people hit those different levels of enlightenment or knowledge in some in more analytical thinking people that you can change throughout time too. You're not permanently stuck on one area of the scale.
So here's my question with the whole thing, and this is why I kind of wonder, can we ever get there? If you are let's say you're born into a red family, and I'm just going to go over this really quick for
Of course.
anybody because most people are not super familiar with spiral dynamics.
Uh-huh.
The lowest or the earliest, I don't want to say the lowest, the earliest stage that I really think that we need to bother talking about is probably a purple. It's a very tribalistic, very magical, very superstitious kind of
Yeah.
culture. Then you get to a red, which is very warlord, kind of my tribe versus your tribe.
Of course.
And then you get to a blue where you're starting to introduce bigger tribes, and they're generally organized by religion. It's very black and white thinking. Then you get to, but it's very you centric. It's not very, it's, if I'm in a blue, I'm not very centered around me. I'm centered around what's the best for other people.
Of course.
And to an extreme a lot of the time where you would have someone who gives so much that they themselves are destitute.
Yeah.
And then you find that well, that doesn't work out so well because I don't have any. I want to give, but I don't have anything to give. So then you swing over into the orange stage, where orange is very capitalistic. But it is very me centric.
Of course.
And so throughout all of these stages of spiral dynamics, there's a pendulum swing back and forth and back and forth. So it's me, you, and every time you're kind of taking the best parts of your last stage and you're trying to apply them to your next stage. You're abandoning the parts that you find that didn't work about your last stage and trying on something else with your new stage. So the problem is, okay, and I'll just get through the rest of these real quick
it's okay.
because
Go
we're
on.
almost there. So orange, very capitalistic. This is the people who get stuck in orange end up being bazillionaires.
Yeah.
And then going to the green stage, that's where like, well, I made my money and I saw how it's the kind of the Jim Carrey quote of, I wish that you would all become rich and famous so that you can see how little it means.
Exactly.
So then, going from there to like, well, I tried that on and that didn't work out so well because I just felt disconnected. Everything was about me. So now I'm going to have everything be about other people again.
Yeah.
So now you're in a green stage of fighting for other people's rights. And I think that there's a point, when you get to like a yellow stage where it's systems thinking and you start to realize that each of these stages have their value along the timeline and that they all kind of are in harmony as long as you can just accept them. So you get to the yellow and the turquoise stages, and I feel like if we can reach a tipping point where enough people, this critical mass of people who are at that kind of yellow and blue stage, or I'm sorry, yellow and turquoise stage, we absolutely would be thinking more about our future. I'm not thinking about like, how can I save $4 right now? I'm thinking about like, what's the negative effect of having a Walmart in my town?
Yeah.
That takes out, the need for 50, 70 other businesses, where the wealth could be more evenly distributed. Everything would be better in 40 years,
Yeah.
but I got to give up that $4 right now.
Of course. Yeah, it's definitely a different way to look at it, and a lot of people who haven't looked into this, it is an interesting system on how different people think, especially when it comes to just social environments versus capitalistic environments, and how we all intermingle and understand each other. But I don't know. I see it as just a system. That's the thing. Is spiral dynamics makes a lot of sense to me. It does. I can see where even I fall on the spectrum. But the other hand is though, how do you use that system and hope that we can eventually reach a greater good, a greater outcome? How do you use a system that may not and actually apply to everyone? And that's the problem that I see when you relate people's ideals and their thinking when it comes to freedom, because freedom is a force. It is a power above us. It does not care if we think yes or no. It cares if we think it all. That's all it dictates.
Okay.
So how do you take any spectrums or anything when all we need to do is move forward in understanding our freedom and how we can use it to move forward instead of using it for whatever we want? And that's the problem with our negative freedoms, is it gives people the power to think, oh, I can do whatever I want, I'm free. Where positive freedoms, where you are limited, it gives you the idea of, I'm not free, but how do I become free? And that's a whole nother step up. And so if you look at that spectrum of each of those groups looking at each other versus, the capitalistic people, the rich people, they have the money to do whatever they want, versus the guy who's just like, no, man, I just care about the people around me, not about money. It doesn't mean anything to me. There's a big segregation between those two groups of people, and
Sure.
there's always going to be one person looking up, one person looking down.
Yeah.
Where if we could reevaluate our freedoms and the way our governments work and the way our beliefs work between humans alone, we could wipe out some of those segregations and slowly
Okay.
work forward, but nobody wants to, because what is it? We're free.
So what's the tool to get there?
Honestly, sadly, and like I said, remove or limit or lay down laws that will put a hindrance on the negative freedoms so we can start producing positive freedoms.
Okay. Do you have an example?
So basically, the one example that I found very easy is there's a man with a wonderful wife. And this was a actual diary documentary. I'm not using names because the name's near impossible to pronounce.
Okay.
Germans, man, I tell you. And he has a wonderful wife. He goes out with his friends for dinner. And on the way back, he was feeling extremely lustful. So he decided to stop at a brothel. Got insanely drunk, slept with a woman, somehow was able to make it back out with his wallet and pocket watch, continued to walk down the street that morning. And a thought occurred to him as he sobered up walking home that, why do I have to be a slave to human nature? Lustful, want, to sleep with someone, want to get drunk, want to go out with my friends and eat. Why couldn't have someone just forced me to stay home with my wonderful wife and I would have never done that?
Huh.
So in that situation, if you had something sitting there saying, hey, you're not supposed to be out at this hour. You're not supposed to be getting hammered drunk in public. You're not supposed to be sleeping with people who are, in this day and age, is illegal. This story was written down and documented back in the 1800s. I mean, there's a big difference in time there, but I think the idea stands. If there's a limit somewhere, then we can look at, that limit allows me to be a better husband. That allows me to, be a better father someday. That will not letting my humanistic side take over. And that's the big difference between the negative freedoms and the positive freedoms, is negative freedoms are very human feeling driven, very what's the word, not prehistoric, but very predatory and primitive.
Yeah.
Where positive freedom is taking those feelings, looking at where you are limited or should I be limited, and move forward from that. Look at the freedoms that if I was limited, like that man was thinking, why didn't someone tell me to stay home? Why didn't someone force me to stay home?
Right. And that is the difference. So what you said in that statement was, why isn't there a law that allows me to be a better husband and a better father? That's I would say that's not the right way to say that. He is allowed to be a better husband and a better father right now. Why isn't there a law that forces him to be a better husband and a better father is a very different thing.
Well, but this was just his writings, and they are very out of date, out of time.
Okay, and
yeah.
I can see somebody spelling it out that way still today.
Well,
but I think it's really important that we're using the right words.
Yes, of course.
So I would call him out on saying, like, it's not that you weren't allowed.
But he was just, a philosopher taking the ideas of, wow, there's a difference between if I am under law and if I am forced to do something, I can see a brighter picture. I can see something I really want to aspire to versus, oh, I'm free, I can do whatever I want. And then you're sitting there going, well, what do I do with my time? Most of the time humans get in trouble. It's throughout history.
Yeah, sure.
We mostly get into trouble.
Boredom will do it for you.
The easiest way is become a parent and you'll see children. I'm not a parent of myself. I've had to babysit a lot and take care of family. Trust me, children get into nothing but trouble until a parent says no, or whoops them, or, lays down, hey, look, this wasn't smart. Don't do it again, because you could get hurt.
Okay. And that's a perfect analogy, and I do want to follow this line.
Of course.
That guy in that story, he had a chance to do something that he didn't feel good about.
Exactly.
Okay. Now let's say we diverge his paths right before that. He makes a better choice or a worse choice. And actually, let's diverge the paths before that at the legislation level. A town that allows a brothel, a town that doesn't allow a brothel. Now he wants to go to a brothel, but he can't.
Yeah.
How long will he want to go to a brothel?
Yeah, that really is another determining factor.
So if he doesn't go to the brothel and then feel like shit about himself, he might just want to go to the brothel his whole life.
And that is where where that specific philosopher wrote, "We hope for the higher moralities of humans in
Right.
those situations. We hope for it, but we're not always given that." And that is definitely one of the things people don't think about when we get freedom.
Right.
I wasn't taught that in school. I was taught, "Oh, you're free." Not, "Hey, your freedom. You have your freedoms. You are lucky. You have to respect them. You have to use them properly." Yeah, you have freedom of speech, but you need to know when to speak, how to speak.
Okay.
What is the right and the wrong ways of doing things. And that is basically the ethics of someone else, a parent or a teacher teaching you that. And so not always do you have the best teachers or the best parents.
Right.
But once you hit, 20 plus years old, I would hope that you've seen enough life and hopefully traveled more than outside your 20 to 100 square mile city, town, village, wherever it is. I would hope that you've traveled far enough to see that there is differences in humans, there's differences in laws, ethics, morals, and that you can start to see those differences very clearly and pick out the best parts of each one,
Okay.
good or bad.
So I think the end of each of these paths is when you're allowed, when you have the freedom to make the wrong decision. You get what you gain is at the end of making that wrong decision, you gain the ability to understand why you don't want to do it again.
Of course.
So you've rewritten your own moral code with
course.
that, rather
And-
than just having it legislated out of your possibilities.
But there are some things, like, that's just one example from a philosopher from over 100 years ago.
a good example still.
It's definitely a good example. But where we live in a more modern day world, the next philosopher who is rebuttaling his idea was, what about the things that do harm people?
Okay.
I'm free to drive. There are people who, we have the right, not just the power of freedom, but the right of freedom to travel in America. Since been rewritten, where there has been some regulations, like you're required insurance, a license. I'm fine with it. I think it's a good idea.
Okay.
Protects people.
Protects the other people.
A lot
Yeah.
of people think it's bullshit to have insurance. I was like, no, because I've been in accidents. Insurance is a good thing. You should have it. Now, should you should we have corrupt insurance companies? No, that's besides the point. But just insurance as the idea.
Let's keep it simple.
Yeah.
Liability insurance.
liability.
Something that protects the other person
Yeah, if
in
I'm-
case
yeah.
you do something stupid.
Yeah, or even if you move towards comprehensive, it's like, look, I'm going to pay out extra money in case I do accidentally wrap
Right.
the car around a pole. Those insurances are there to help people only. Some of them are out to screw, but besides the point. And that's the thing, is there are certain things that are law that protect everyone.
Okay.
And there are people who still this day, well, it's a free country, I have the right to travel and freely travel, so why should I have to pay insurance? It's like, do you not realize the good it does? And that's where the abuse of those freedoms come in.
Just wait till
Yeah.
they get hit by someone who doesn't
And
have
no one can
liability
afford to
insurance.
pay for it, or you're in the hospital.
Yeah.
And it's just like,
And the person runs and doesn't get caught because, they run because they don't have the insurance, and
Of course.
they know they're going to jail if they get.
and that's one of the
get
more
caught.
minute, most, discussed. And I always try to
Yeah.
bring something new to the table, a new kind of controversial idea,
Right.
something that no one's heard before.
Yeah.
That one's a more common one, but it helps relate to the audience.
Is that a raging debate right now?
Every person I've talked to when it comes down to freedoms is there's always, and I'm going to stay away from this one. I'll just mention it as part of the conversation, like the Second Amendment and guns. That is
Okay.
one I stay away from because everyone's heard every argument since the beginning of time. I have a whole different view on it, but we won't get into that because that's
It's
a whole
for
nother
another show.
2-hour
Let's do it,
conversation.
man.
But no, there's a lot of those freedoms that we take so for granted that we become blind, and the government knows we become blind to what the real meaning is,
Okay.
and then they use it against us.
Okay.
Or they use it for us to go against each other. And that's the biggest problem I've seen in our government form. It's not the people. It's not you, me, the guy down the block, the guy 3 cities over. It's not him who's abusing his freedoms. It's the government creating our freedoms is subjective, graspable, and you do what you want with it.
Okay.
That's the problem I see. Is they're like, haha, watch what they do with it, and then we can formulate what we do so we get the better end of the stick when it comes to freedom. And it's so corrupt. It's so crooked.
I just think that the freedoms that we are given by our government are so meaningless.
They
I
are.
mean,
They are completely meaningless.
you're free to have. You can have this color car or this color car, or you can have, I mean, it's not
Or
like
how about the fact, why can't I call up Ford and just order a car straight from them? I have to get it through a dealership.
right, yeah,
Yeah, stupid things like that.
okay,
I mean, and that's the thing that kills me about it is like there's a lot of people who, if they do end up listening to this, they'll be like, oh yeah, huh, that's a funny thing, funny thought. Let's think about this. And there's other people like, oh, he's just trying to infringe on freedoms, or he doesn't understand America. And it's like, well, America's changed a lot. It changes every day. New laws are written, new laws are changed. The old laws get kicked out the door. I mean, there's a lot of things that change, and the ones that people don't pay attention to until it's staring you right in the face is when it comes to our freedoms. And they think, oh, they're trying to infringe on our freedom. It's like it's been infringed on before, since the country started. Why are we only noticing this now? Well, back then, when the country started, we didn't have the greatest educations. We didn't have
right,
understanding of words, mathematics, and things like that. So it kind of boils down to now we do understand it. Now we do have dictionary definitions that's universally understood.
okay,
We have laws that we can pull up on websites and read. We should be paying more attention. We should understand this facade that the government puts before us, and we don't. We just say, "Oh, I'm free."
okay. So going back to the example, and I mean, I think it's a good analogy because it fits in. I mean, I could imagine a lot of other scenarios like the guy who goes to the brothel,
Of course.
and they're equally pertinent.
Yeah.
I'm gonna pause this for the. So this example of the guy who goes to the brothel, as long as people don't have the freedom to sort of try on the worst parts of their nature, and they don't have, so what they don't carry away from them is a reason for themselves not to do that.
Of course.
Then what you would have, it seems to me like you wouldn't have people who are refining their reasons, right? And then creating, having generations of children below them who they're like, hey, this is what I did, and it was terrible.
Oh, of course.
So I personally think the mechanism to get ourselves to that place is going to be education.
Well, and that's the biggest thing. And education is the number one. Learning and seeing what people have done before. But if we're going to stay on the topic of the guy who went to the brothel, have you ever been to a brothel? Have you ever said that's a mistake, or been walking down the street and being like, "Man, I wish I had a whorehouse down the road from here."
Right.
We have been so far further in our culture than that man has, and it's been illegal in our area for so long that it's not even a thought anymore.
Okay.
And that's the biggest thing. Karl Marx wrote about it, which I don't agree with a lot of his point. Well, it's not that I don't agree. His ideas are very interesting, very creative, and definitely feasible in a perfect situation.
Right. Where every person is
But
highly
a
educated.
lot of other philosophers have written about when it comes to democracy, republics, monarchies, and things like that. The transition period is the hardest. And
Yeah.
getting from where we are now to what either you or I am talking about, it's going to be very difficult if we ever do try to attempt it. It's
Okay.
going to be, and every philosopher said it is extremely difficult to get the perfect balance in the negative and the positive freedoms, the right laws, getting the right people to talk to each other in the right tone and manner. It will be destruction potentially, as one person wrote, and that is definitely one of the hurdles we deal with.
Okay.
And it can go on and on. There are some things we're not even taught anymore in school because it has now been just a ethical taught lesson when you're born in the U.S.
Okay.
And yeah,
So me being born into a blue family, and I mean blue, true blue through and through, very religious. You don't go backwards. I mean, you don't regress really in these along spiral dynamics, from what I can tell.
okay.
So my big question with spiral dynamics: if you're an orange family, do you have orange kids who sort of skip the blue stage? And if you're a green family, do you have green kids who skip blue and orange?
Honestly, from what I've seen by a lot of the people I know, because I've got a fairly big family, not in touch with them anymore, but definitely a much bigger family. And there were some parents, like my father, who was very educated, very smart man, but he had his own problems and issues. And then I had my mother, who was very smart, very honest, very brutal, but understood humans. That
Okay.
was what she was good at, and she understood what and again, with freedom, she knew certain things that you can just let your kid freely do, and he'll learn, and other things where I'm not even going to let him attempt it. He will kill himself.
Yeah.
And I learned just from watching. My sister and my two brothers did not learn whatsoever. So you can have different spectrum parents, and it is really up to just the will of that child to come up on a different spectrum growing up. and coming out of that family. And I don't think that I'm pretty sure a parent can try, like an orange parent trying to raise their kid to be an orange kid. But they
I,
could just flip the switch straight to a different color and you don't know what it could be. I mean, honestly, it really.
Possibly. I feel like two orange parents who are really on the same page wouldn't have. It seems inevitable that they would raise orange
Or
children.
that kid could come out and be like, I don't like what you and dad are saying. I'm out of here. Move across country and
Sure.
change his whole life and become something different.
Totally.
I mean, you can have wonderful parents and a horrible kid, or horrible parents, and you can have a kid like me who comes out and is just like, oh, hey,
Wonderful.
be nice to everyone.
Yeah.
Let's all look for the better world, man. Let's just stop killing each other. Let's just, try
Yeah.
and be a better world.
Let me float a half-baked theory by you.
Oh, I'm down.
Knowledge is what you get from making your own mistakes. Wisdom is what comes when you can learn from other people's mistakes. So you don't have to make the mistakes yourself.
Honestly, I think in my idea of the definitions of those words and the way I understand those words personally, wisdom is from experience and knowledge is from reading the books, seeing other people go through it, watching the video on why you don't drunk drive and things like that. Wisdom is definitely like, I've seen a lot of life. I've been there.
Okay.
I've done that. And knowledge is like, he's 14 and he knows all of law. Like
Yeah.
somehow this kid is going to be, a lawyer, a judge, or supreme justice someday.
You
yeah.
changed my mind.
Okay.
I agree.
And literally, it's just words in that point of changing the
Right.
mind. But I definitely agree with that. There are some people like me. I've made my fair share of mistakes. But when I look at the mistakes I made versus all of my peers who are the same age, went through the same lives, I'm just a drop in the ocean compared to their mistakes because I was able to sit back and look and see and be like, I'm never going to do that. That I might try. And, oh, that looks like fun.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I just know that I've known personally people who are very smart and very foolish.
Oh, of
and
course.
I've known people who are not smart at all and very wise.
Of course, yeah.
They make good decisions
And
without
for-
having to have made the mistakes themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's if we can get that's what we're looking for. We want to have a society where we can say, hey, if you are married with kids and you have the option to go to a brothel, it's the best idea not to.
Exactly.
But
We
I
want to be
really-
able to put that out there and pray that their morality kicks in and they say, yeah, this isn't a good idea. They've been saying on TV, this is for single guys who are bored. We
Right.
would hope that would be the example set down for our future generations, but it's not.
Right.
All I was taught in school, because I didn't learn any of that understanding. I see what my brothers and sisters go through. I don't do it. They didn't teach me that in school.
Right.
I guess it was a God-given talent of mine to be able to observe a situation.
So, but the risks of going to that brothel, aside from possible STDs that you carry,
Theft,
over to
'cause he
your
was
wife,
drunk.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But also potentially getting caught,
Of course.
having your family sort of destroyed over it.
Exactly.
If you can be educated enough that, you know what I mean?
Look at the outcome. And I think I think you just kind of definitely highlighted my idea when it comes to freedom. Some people don't care about that. I've had so many people in my life where I don't care. I'm free to do whatever I want. There's a first time for everything, right? And it's like, who raised you? And no,
Right.
it's not, and then I sit there and I was like, no, it's not the question of who raised you. What happened in your life that changed that outlook from being a kid? I want to grow up to be a doctor. I want to be rich and famous. I want to do something productive in a
and
sense.
now I'm at a brothel.
And now I'm in a brothel
Yeah.
because I said there's a first time for everything,
Right.
and you don't know what you're high on. You don't know where your wallet's at. And I just look at them and be like, it's actually, I show a lot of pity because it's like, how did you get from this to this?
Right.
Point A to point B. That makes zero sense to me. And then I look back and it's like, because they had the freedom to. Now, I'm not saying you can infringe on that freedom, but freedom is the cause for that choice.
You know what happens with most kids who have the smallest amount of freedom?
Yeah, the average statistic, not that I'm a big fan of using statistics and numbers, usually become pretty reckless in their early life once they
Right.
get away from their parents. They party hard, they get into stupid accidents, they think they're on top of the world and Then you have a little bit skewed version of that where you get super control freaks. They're the only ones allowed to be free. They're going to be just like they hated their parents
Yes,
being.
right.
And that's a big issue with
So
a
how
lot
do you
of it.
make a system that gives people enough freedom to screw up in ways that aren't going to destroy other people's lives, and enough freedom where they can make little mistakes? You know,
Yeah,
it's the guardrail. You can
exactly.
bump against the
Well,
guardrail a few times without going off the
and I think
cliff.
we really look at it. What happens when you put a kid only through school and their parents teach them nothing? Either they're going to not care, flunk out, or if they are a good kid and they pay attention and they actually excel in school, their ethics and morals are going to be very stunted when they get out into the real world. They'll get swindled, they'll get treated like garbage, or they'll start treating people like garbage. When you have real parenting, kids who have two good parents, and that, let's hope that the kid comes out good. Parents, especially my mother and father, yeah, you can go play outside. Yeah, you guys can fight with sticks. Just don't hurt each other. Don't poke an eye out. Yeah, you can ride your bikes down the road as long as there's no cars coming. We live on a country road. But the second that I was like, hey, mom, can I go bike ride to the store? She's like, no, you're still too young for that. You'll get yourself into trouble or you'll get hurt and die. Well, once I hit, 14, 15, 16, hey, can I go to the store? I got a couple dollars. Yeah, but be careful.
Right.
There was like a designated understanding between mother and father and their children that they knew that something was safe and something wasn't. And it
And that's
was
great parenting.
and it is great parenting to be able to be like, hey, once I hit 17, mom, me and my friends are going to go do this. Don't come running to me if you take an eye out or you lose a finger.
Right.
Okay, fair enough. She was always there if I did try to take an eye out or lose a finger.
Sure.
She was a wonderful mother in
Right.
that part. But as you get older, parents expect you to learn those dynamics of what is safe, what is not. And it really does. Parents, I've complained to my mother a million times, infringing on my freedom. I have the right to do this. I have the right to do that. I am a civilian of the U.S. And then I look back and be like, I was just being an arrogant prick.
Okay.
And I'm glad that she infringed on it. I'm glad that she told me no, because if I had gone through with it, I'd be in a lot worse place. And I think that's the problem, is people can't look forward to that point where I did. I was able to look forward in certain aspects and arguments of, this is where I'll end up if I do this. Maybe what my mother's saying is right. I admit I don't like it. I do not agree with it, but what she's saying is right.
Okay.
And that is the hardest thing that people can't really see past that I've noticed between my peers.
Okay.
But
So I think that communism doesn't work, and I
No.
mean even socialism in a lot of ways doesn't work
Marxist
because
socialism would not work at all.
it doesn't allow for people to be.
Mm-hmm.
If everyone was you, yeah,
Oh.
it would work.
Yeah, well, and even Karl Marx wrote on socialism. He's like, socialism was just the stepping point between capitalism going into communism. It was like that 10, 20-year gap that you were converting over. It wasn't meant to be a permanent thing. And so that's like when Russia went from full communism to just a socialistic point of view. It was better, sure, 100 times better, but it still wasn't as what people call as great as like the U.S. or any other country that has a more democratic or just republic view.
Okay.
And I mean, you can look at countries of the offshoots, like you can look at the UK. I mean, technically, it is a semi-socialist with a parliament, but you kind of get to vote on some things. On the other hand, you can't. You're not allowed to say anything, or if you do try and, protest, they put a dead stop to it. But they're still functioning. The people seem to be okay. They got low crime rates. But at what cost? Are they even aware of the costs? Are they aware that there's more freedom in the world than what they are living in, or do they even care to know? I mean,
Right. So
and
a
that's the
perfect
thing.
system has to include the people who don't understand the long-term costs.
And that is the biggest debate with philosophers in between the two types of freedoms that we can and can't have versus three types, depending on if you include government and capitalism. And I think we have so many different views. How do we make it fair for everyone? I don't want equal for everyone, because that doesn't work. We don't have perfect people. How
Right.
do we make it fair for everyone? How do we meet in the middle? Because right
Do you
now
have
we're
ideas for
not.
that?
Say what?
Do you have ideas for that?
Honestly, meeting in the middle, it really does come down to everyone has a voice. We have the technology, we have the computers, we have the processing power for the information for everyone to sign a piece of paper. Is this law effective for you? Does this law hurt you in any way? Does this law enable you to do, and this is hoping for the morality of better people, basically an analysis of every person who has to abide by these laws or abide by this new ruling or reduction of ruling. Do you have any idea if we make dispensaries legal? Is there any complaints that you might have to the government? Instead of just saying, oh, we're making this a law. If you have any complaints, write in. No, send out a brochure that you have to fill out and send back. That way the complaint, and that's the biggest thing that I look at when it comes to finding the medium of, there's a lot of places that'll just put a law into effect without asking questions. Well, sure, that's fair for the government, but it's not fair for the people. Okay. And then there's a lot of people who will be like, oh, I did this day and nothing came of it. And it's just like, okay, but if I did that, something would come of it. Where's the equal zone between those two people? Like, I got away with theft. I didn't the first time I attempted it.
Okay.
So that's a very rudimentary example, but it's just the differences between two people. How do you find a middle zone? I'm not 100% sure on that because there are so many different types of people.
Right.
I've seen people get away with things their whole life and get caught during the big score. I've seen millions of people never get caught. I've seen people get caught the first time it's something serious and the first time it's stealing gum at the store.
And if you play risky games,
there's going to be
play stupid games, you get stupid prizes.
And all I'm saying is, and in those situations, how do we equalize the playing field between them when it comes to our laws? Our Chief Justice has really tried. The people who wrote in the American law over years have really, really tried to make a fair system of consequences and do's and don'ts. They really have tried. Some of them are corrupt, especially more in local government, but our federal government is very easily understood. It's very well documented, written, but do we agree with what they've written?
If the people at the top had to follow it, sure.
Yeah, of course.
But I mean, here's what we're up against right now. And this is the last. We're headed, I think, into communism as it is right now.
I think it's even beyond communism, not to cut you off. I think we're going into not probably totalitarianism, because monarchy involves a king or a queen, but where it is the government telling us yes or no at all times. I believe it's worse than communism.
But when can the government tell you yes or no?
In the circumstances that across the board of everyone agreeing or disagreeing, which is why we all need to vote evenly, not just on presidents or laws, but if everyone can say, like 77% of the U.S. says, yeah, this law will help us.
Okay, that was a badly phrased question.
Or how...
What I meant to ask is, what are the circumstances when the government can say yes or no?
Well, I guess the easiest way to look at that would be during my example for that, as an example that we could use more nowadays for that situation, is the UK's government during World War II when Alan Turing was able to crack the Enigma code. One of his scientists who was helping him instantly went to pick up the phone and say, hey, we cracked it. Let's beat the Nazis. He slammed the phone and said, no, you won't. And then the big discussion came up of like, well, what do you mean? He's like, we have to let the government handle this very precisely, because if we instantly just come out and say that, oh, we cracked it, what do you think the Germans are going to do? They're just going to formulate a new code.
Okay.
And so basically the idea there was we have to let the government do the numbers. How many attacks, how many people living, dying, how many supplies get through and don't get through.
Sure, we have to
look
let
at
the
that
military
ratio.
be the military.
Yeah, well, and not just military, but I mean in any aspect of the government telling us yes or no. We got to look at the numbers. We got to look at the ratios. Hurt versus unhurt supplies versus no supplies. Fair being not fair in the eyes of the people. The government saying yes or no really should be the statistic ratio system, because government's not supposed to be on belief. They're not supposed to be on religion. They're supposed to look at the hard felt science and facts. And I think that's where people get really confused, is because we're looking at a government that was written in belief versus nowadays when we're trying to formulate laws that are based on fact. And that is like, I see the biggest fight between constitutional rights and laws versus public normal laws that we have today. There's a lot of infringements, a lot of so-and-so versus so-and-so in court. And that is definitely the hardest part of a government saying yes or no, is, do we trust them with those numbers? Do we trust them that they're getting a hold of everybody to see if it is right or wrong? Or if it is a question of right or wrong, is it an ethical question? Is it a moral question?
Okay.
Should they just say yes or no? And I mean, there's a lot of buildup just to where we draw the line on if a government should say yes or no. And honestly, that's a really hard one to tackle. There's so much that goes into it.
Let me give you my take on this.
Yeah, what's your idea?
I think that the government only has the power to say yes and no when it takes away the freedom of the people. So I've got a friend who is on dialysis.
Okay.
Costs $30,000 a year for him to get dialysis. The government pays for that, But the median income being $38,000, and I don't know if I've talked about this on this podcast before, so sorry if I'm repeating myself, but the median income being $38,000 means that he is allowed to make up to $8,000 a year. If he makes $8,001 a year,
It's cut off.
he's cut off, right?
Yeah.
He is no longer eligible for that $30,000. So he's got to make a jump from $8,000 to $38,001 in 1 year to have any benefit from bettering himself. He is forever dependent on the government. And
Yeah.
we're getting, and especially with the coronavirus, all of this stuff, all these businesses being closed, and the government's like, we'll print money and we'll give you we're going to give you like a little tiny sliver of this money, where huge corporations are getting gigantic pieces of this. And and I mean, it's all they're devaluing the rest of our money, so they're going to give you your $1,200 and you're going to pay your rent that month, and then best of luck next month with your dollar that's only worth 80% of what it was last month.
Okay,
I mean, it doesn't work that fast, but it works that consistently.
Yeah, I get your point. Now I see the angle you're coming from, because my mother, she's on SSI. She's only lived in the country for, oh man, only. She's actually lived here for like 30 some years now.
Okay.
My father was a piece of work. She was forced to not be able to work, it's a sad story, won't get into it, but once she got divorced, she's finally able to work. She could only work for 6 years before she had an autoimmune deficiency, which is lupus. It destroys your immune system and makes your body attack itself, which is a very simple way of doing it. She went on disability. Well, you have to work 10 years to get the credits for full disability. She only worked for like 6.5. So the government is very stingy. No assets, only one vehicle, only this, only that, can't make any more money than this, blah, blah,
Right.
blah. And so she was stuck living under the system.
So
And
and
it's a
they
horrible
can
system.
tell her yes, and they can tell her no. With
And
no, I mean,
that part is 100% unfair. It's wrong. She has lived here. She's paid her taxes. Her parents have paid their taxes. I'm paying taxes. If anything, a big chunk of my taxes that go into either or states or counties insurance and everything, depending on if a state has Medicaid or not, going so on and so forth. I'm paying a big chunk into the medical care she gets and the money that she gets from the state. I know that for a fact. And my grandmother lived here for another 20 years and worked until she died and never claimed taxes back. And so there's like $750,000 floating around in a pot of the government that can be distributed, and it's just like, I know there's money there.
so, but
And
you're the one who's paying in, and every
Yeah.
other American is the one paying into this Social Security insurance.
Exactly.
Social Security.
and then they have the right to tell these people yes or no.
But yeah, and it's not even the government's money. Why? Because the
Exactly.
government doesn't produce anything.
Exactly.
They don't make any money.
They produce structure.
Right. So we
And
pay
that's
them
it.
to produce the structure,
Yeah.
but that gives them. Why does that give them, the people
In
who aren't
that
paying
situation
for it?
is where I definitely agree on that. No, that is not the government's right to say yes or no on if they can claim SSI and still get, spousal support from a bad marriage or something like that, and then that instantly makes them uneligible for any other help that they need while they're disabled, like Medicaid or food stamps, so on and so forth. Those benefits are no longer available because they count all these things like unearned incomes, earned incomes, assets that aren't truly assets.
Okay.
And it's so unfair that the government can say yes or no to these people on what they can and can't do, and it can boil down to local government too. I've seen it first-handedly, but I like to take a second to step back from what I've seen. And let's look at it from the opposite point of view, the government. Social Security is the most fraudulent program, has been the most abused and used in America since the program came out. So, when you look at that, the people who fake disabilities, the people who,
Right.
and it's hurting people who, it's so difficult to get on any type of Social Security, and it's hurting people who truly need it because there were people who abused it. So the government had to say yes or no.
Right.
So, there is a cause, but should they still be doing it with the technology and the format we have now? That is the big discretion when it comes to the morality of yes and no in the government in that situation.
And Social Security.
And Social Security.
Social Security is the most aptly named of any of the things that are out right now. No Child Left Behind. Come on.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
the Patriot Act. is so unpatriotic.
Yeah.
Social Security is very aptly named. It is a very socialist program.
And a lot of people, when they first came up with the idea in government, a lot of people were against it. They figured that if you weren't smart enough to save your money on your own, or if you were dumb enough to get injured in a job, there was a lot of people from the uneducated days of that time era where we didn't understand certain things. They figured, oh well, too bad, so sad. Shit happens. We're a free country. We deserve to live it freely. And but it took people, I guess, who thought more along my ideas of a social point of view, that someone gets hurt in a job and they can never work again. They're paralyzed. So we just leave them to rot. That's kind of the idea. So a lot of people would say, yeah, screw them. I don't know those people, or they even never heard of them on the news, or they don't know the statistic, and they're blindly agreeing or disagreeing with laws when it comes to Social Security. I'm just like, the government does know. They have the statistics. They have the numbers.
Right.
They have the people with camcorders
We've
hiding
seen
out.
all this
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah. And I'm just like, so they kind of, honestly, they do have the right to say yes or no, but are they saying the right answer? Are they
Right.
saying yes when they should be saying no, or are they saying no when they should be saying yes? That's where the line, I say, is drawn on where they are corrupt versus not corrupt. And they have their reasons too. They honestly do. I can look at it 100% outside of me and be like, okay, they have their reasons, but are they using those reasons efficiently and in the right way? And in that area, I can definitely say they're corrupt. I think they have the right to say yes or no, but I don't think they're doing the right thing.
Well, see, so the difference between a good old, like a monarchy or a dictatorship is that, so basically the the value of everybody's work goes straight to the top, and then it's all divvied out. So you're going to work, and everything goes to the dictator provides.
Of course.
Right? So I don't see how getting closer to that. Yeah, I mean, it is closer to that system.
Yeah, it is very. Like I said,
So-
a lot of people think that we're in a democratic republic. We are not. The way our government system works is nothing close to that. We are very close to having a dictator and stuff like that when it comes to our government. I mean,
Yeah, it's just that the dictator is a group of people.
yeah. So
Yeah.
you have a total government system that tells the people yes and no. And yeah, go on with your idea.
Yeah, so that's basically, I don't know. I think we're kind of running up on.
On time.
We're getting close to almost 80 minutes here. So
Okay.
we'll do closing arguments in a second here.
Closing argument.
I do want to. So my buddy wrote a book called "How to Enslave the Planet,"
Of course.
and it's a step-by-step guide to becoming a dictator.
Nice.
It's an excellent book, but he really clearly makes the case that if you don't think you're a slave right now, it's really hard to argue with after you read this book. So
of course.
I'll give you my copy. if
Yeah,
you want
that's how great. I'd definitely
it's
read it.
excellent. So anyway, all right. Go ahead. Closing
Closing
statements.
arguments.
Yeah.
I really don't have an argument. I'm not really much of a debateful kind of person, but I guess I really, when I want to speak to the public, I want people. I don't care if you're just one of those people who the second you heard socialism, you turn the TV, computer, phone off. That's not who I'm speaking to. People who actually want to hear what we had to say and think. That's all I ask people is think. What is so wrong with the definition I've given with socialism? It is everyone on this soil in this country gets a say in everything. What's wrong with that? Like I said, it's basically just a more forced democracy. And we all get to vote. We all get to have something to say. And we all get a choice in how things function versus the government says so. The people with all the money say so. If anything, it would be at least one step better than what we have. And so that's kind of the one thing I want people to think about is my idea may be unpopular, 100% unpopular. It may be very controversial, but that's because the idea of socialism, the name itself has been tainted by different parts of history. Karl Marx, Russians, all sorts of places like that. But the definition I'm going for is a lot different than what they ever wanted. That's
Okay.
kind of like my point in this.
Yeah, I like that. I'm gonna pause this for a second. All right, so I have an advantage here because we just paused for like 2 minutes, and I got to really consider my position here.
Again, his freedom.
I
It's
know
killing me.
my oppressive freedom. All right, I do think that the more freedom people have, the more people will progress through a morality, like their system of morality. And it's not until we get to critical mass where the systems of morality on an individual basis have progressed to the point where we don't want brothels anymore.
Yeah.
We want the right to vote on things that are important, and we don't want to be under a system where even if the majority votes one way, the electoral college can say something else and change the next 4 to 8 years of the country.
Exactly.
It's a pseudo freedom.
It is. It truly is.
So I think we need more real freedom, and I think the only way that the people are going to get that freedom is they're going to have to demand it. Nobody hands over freedom.
No.
Nobody in power is going to say, like, you know what? I really like you guys as a country. I'm going to make you guys more free. You have to go and get it. And that's really unfortunate. But I think at least, if nothing else, this whole coronavirus and having people locked inside, I mean, not locked inside, but you can't go to the park. There's a woman just today who got arrested for going to the park. Or I don't know if the video just came out recently or something. Anyway, she's arrested for going to the park. She is not free to go to the park. And I'm very much against that. Like, we're at a point right now where we're being faced with that we are just really not all that free. And we haven't been for a long time because, I mean, as long as we've been in a system that could just, well, we've got a virus on our hands. Without really a whole lot of information, take away the freedoms that people have.
I do have I would feel a strong rebuttal for that, but we don't have the time for it, so that would have to be a conversation for another day.
I mean, like, I might just cut it off here, but
yeah, we can still talk about it. So
yeah,
we can definitely cut it here if we want, and I totally agree. I think that your point of view on our freedoms is definitely a right here, right now, let's fix it. And mine is more of something we could aspire to down the road.
And I completely agree with yours as far as something we could aspire
That's
to.
fine. It's not 5 years. It's not 10 years. It's not even 50 or 100 years.
Yeah.
It's something that the humans, literally have to transcend into. Where yours is just like, wake up.
I definitely am interested right now in having a system that works better for who we are right now.
Yeah. I guess I dream a little too big. That's all.
No. And I don't think it's too big at all. I think it's attainable. I don't think we'll see it in our lifetime because of the consciousness of humanity. It's just not really ready for it. We haven't made enough mistakes as a species to realize the folly in the mistakes that we make.
Of course.
So, I mean, I think we need to fumble around. I think we need to mess it up a bunch more times. And then really, in the whole thing with communism, we've gotten a first-hand look at what happens when you go from capitalism to communism.
Of course. It's
Your
horrible.
buildings go into shambles because, well, we don't really have
People
to work
dread
all that
their
hard
lives.
because
People are dragged off to the gulag because they spoke out against the government to their neighbor. I mean, it's horrible.
Yeah.
That is the very corrupt version of communism. Karl Marx didn't intend for it, but he really didn't write any fail-safes. That was the problem with his idea. And there's no fail-safes for that. If everyone can agree, corruption. Fix it, let's get this guy out of here, let's fix it. And that's the biggest problem with some of our other forms of government, was there was no fail-safes written in at such a level that our founding fathers did it. Our founding fathers, they were brilliant men, let alone, I don't agree with everything they say, I don't agree with the people that they were, but for forming a country in the way that they did at the time that they did, in the middle of war, basically, I mean, excellent job.
That document has stood.
Yeah, I mean, the only country with that long-lasting document to keep us, somewhat together. It's phenomenal. Even through the Civil War, there were still people who respected the constitutional laws, even though we didn't agree with each other in the North and the South.
Right.
I mean, there's a lot of different situations, but, I mean, I give the guys props. Now that we're in a different time era and things have changed a lot in humans, do I still agree with some of their original ideas? No. But I'm not saying discard them. I'm saying let's adapt them to what will suit us and help us now.
I love it, man.
Yeah, that's where I'm at on it. I mean...
Dude, thanks for doing this.
Yeah, no doubt.
I really appreciate
I found it intriguing. I figured I should just say something to the world. I'm not here to change minds. I'm not here to change anything. I just figure it's a good idea. Food for thought.
For sure. Next time we'll talk about guns. Maybe, maybe
Guns.
we could just have a shootout in the street. You and me, pistols at dawn, sir.
This place is built from the Wild West. Let's do it.
I know, right? All right, man. Peace out, everybody.